Right, on Thursday, the Arizona State Senate held a hearing on the results of the audit of the 2020 election ballots in Maricopa County. Now, the Arizona Senate President, Karen Fann, said the legislature needs more material and data from the county for there to be a final report, because this raised a lot of questions. In fact, here's a clip of what she had to say. Clip number 4, please.
Once again, I just want to state that that at no time have we ever implied or inferred that there was any intentional misdoings here in any way whatsoever. And in fact, we certainly hope not. But we do need to have this information and answer these questions so that we can make sure that the voters of Arizona have solid answers as to how our election systems works, the check and balances, to know that they have a safe and secure ballot when it comes in. So we will be asking for this additional information.
So what did the audit uncover that it now has the Senate asking for additional information? Here to talk about it is J. Christian Adams, President and General Counsel of Public Interest Legal Foundation, which is dedicated to election integrity. Christian, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what was discovered during this audit that now has called for basically going door to door to get additional information to verify some of this.
Well, look, elections are always messy. They're never perfect. And I think what they found in Arizona, that's the case, that you can't always have a perfectly clean, when I say clean, I mean without incident, without glitches, election. And Arizona was no different. And there's no doubt that there were some administrative problems. Ballots might not have gotten processed as quickly and cleanly as we would have liked. There certainly isn't some sort of evidence they found that shows, like, votes were being flipped to the degree that the president lost. But here's the important thing to remember. One of the things that these audits bring us is more information. They bring us details about how to make elections better and with fewer glitches.
I mean, according to reports, you see that 8,000 voters who voted in November were removed from the voter rolls after the election, meaning apparently they were no longer either didn't live in the area, were not qualified to vote. 4,000 Maricopa County voters in the presidential election registered after a court-ordered deadline of October the 15th. And then what I find most significant was it pertained to the mail-in ballots, that 74,243 of these mail-in ballots says there was no clear record of them actually being sent. So more mail-in ballots came in than were sent out. I mean, that certainly would raise some questions.
Well, look, all of these are complicated election administration issues. For one, you could go in and get your mail-in ballot sometimes. So just because something wasn't mailed out doesn't mean that it wasn't actually properly delivered. On the removal after the election, somebody who died around Thanksgiving or December or January is going to be removed from the voter rolls, even though they voted in November. So that doesn't surprise me either. These are things, when you're in election administration, they happen all the time. And that's one of the pitfalls of the last, couple of months, is separating fact from fiction, wheat from the chaff, hype versus real. And, each of these situations have to be looked at carefully. As a general rule, Tony, under the federal law, the motor voter law, if you vote in November, you can't be removed. It's like a block against you ever being removed from the voter rolls if you vote, at least for at least 2 federal cycles. So these are interesting questions, and I think the audit helps us get to the bottom of understanding what we can do to make things better next time. There's always value from carefully looking at what happened in an election.
But why the opposition to looking at this?
Right, because here's why. Because the Democrats, the folks who supported Joe Biden, the mainstream media, they don't want you to know about the problems associated with any election that they won. It's only the elections they lose that they want to audit and pay careful attention to. And so this is just a little bit of inconsistency. It's like hate has no home here until there's lots of hate. And so we're used to this from this crowd. And I think that this is a situation where they don't want us to look at the glitches and mistakes that were made because they want everyone to think everything was perfect.
So this is the largest county in Arizona. It's one of the largest counties in the country. About 4 million voters that live in that county. With what you see thus far from the preliminary audit results, are you concerned that there may have been something going on here?
Well, I don't think it's organized. That's one of the important things for folks to understand is the system has so many gaps and seams that you don't have master command. You know, Dr. Evil is not in the bunker organizing this stuff. It's usually an organic process where stuff gets messed up without somebody actually doing it. And, machines break down. And we had a lawsuit, Tony, in Maricopa County, where we represented people whose votes didn't count when they put the thing in the scanner and they couldn't pop it out to have it redone. And so there's no question about it that things went wrong in Maricopa County. It, by the way, is one of the worst run election offices in the entire country, I can tell you. The Maricopa County for years has been slackers and dragging their feet on fixing things. So it doesn't surprise me that things had breakdowns. I want to emphasize most election vulnerabilities and breakdowns are not part of a plot. They're just what happens. And it's important to understand that.
Right, I agree with that, and that's where I think that I think the election, there were enough election irregularities in this last election that raise my level of, lower my level of confidence, I should say, in the outcome of the election. All right, and I've read some of your stuff that in some of the lawsuits and other things you've been involved in. I tend to believe that there are some, and I agree with you. I think there's so many different parts to these elections. I've been involved in them for a number of years. There's some probably inherent weaknesses in these systems, but I still think that there may have been those that took advantage of some of the weak points in this election cycle.
Right, and that's called Philadelphia.
Yes.
That's exactly what happened in Philadelphia, where you had essentially one-party rule because the Republican on the Philadelphia Election Commission is not really a Republican. His name's Al Schmidt, and he should be thrown off. President Trump even went after him. And so what you had there is one-party rule where a 97% Democrat county, namely Philadelphia, is abandoning all the procedures. They're having counting ballots with no one being allowed to watch, using dishonest characterizations of the facility. They were calling them, well, these are just counting centers, they're not voting centers. Meanwhile, Tony, there's thousands of people voting in the so-called not voting center. And so one thing after another, we could fill a show with the shenanigans that took place in Philadelphia. And there, I think that it's a different story where you do have people who have dark hearts and are trying to manipulate the system deliberately. So it all depends on where you're talking about. And I tell you, Philadelphia is a bad place for this.
Now, that would not be described as voter fraud because voters did not fraudulently file or vote. The system was manipulated. I mean, the same thing, we have Mark Zuckerberg putting all this money into these ballot boxes and giving money. Well, Philadelphia is a good example of where they gave money. I think they gave about $8 million to put people on the streets to go knocking on doors to hand out ballots and then take them back. That's ballot harvesting.
Great example, Tony. It's actually $10 million they gave Philadelphia, which more than doubled their budget. Their original budget was $9.5, and they went up with radio ads on Spanish language radio stations to get out the vote. Now, do you think those are getting out Trump votes? Of course not. That's how they play. That's not voter fraud. And what I'm trying to emphasize is the manipulation in Philadelphia requires us to check and examine our terminology and get more sophisticated because the left got more sophisticated in 2020. And we have to do the same thing and not just fall into the standard, language.
You are absolutely right. And I think that's why the media gave them an excuse, not that they really needed one, to be dismissive of the concerns of conservatives. Even, I think Bill Barr was right. I don't think, when he said there was not enough voter fraud to change the outcome of the election, I think he was right. He wasn't talking about the irregularities that you and I are talking about. He was talking about voter fraud. And so words, at least to some of us, words still have meaning, and it's important. So I think what you're doing in terms of educating, voters, and then tracking, following what's happening in Arizona, and hopefully, and this is my next question for you, Christian, with what's happening in Arizona and uncovering these weaknesses, do you think this will lead to other jurisdictions doing similar audits, evaluations?
Well, I hope so. And look at what happened in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, they did an audit and evaluation where they found 300 votes that went the wrong way. And somebody might say, well, that's not enough to give Trump the victory in New Hampshire. But it was almost enough to give Bush the victory in Florida in 2000. So 300 votes matter. And it could be 200 votes the next time that decides the president of the United States. That's why we have to be vigilant. New Hampshire did an audit. They found problems. They're going to fix them. And that's what we ought to be looking at in places like Arizona. In Philadelphia, there's no audit. All there are snickering victors who are getting away scot-free with manipulating the system.
But you have a state legislature that is looking at some of this information. And so, with Arizona taking these steps, you could have, Republican legislatures that are concerned about voting integrity, other side not so much so. They could do, hearings, they could do investigation. The important thing is that we not let this go, that we look at the weak points, we look at areas that were manipulated, maybe that's too strong, I don't think so in some cases, but certainly taken advantage of, so that we can restore the confidence of Americans in our system of elections.
I agree, because when you lose confidence in the outcome, bad things start to happen. And it's not just theoretical stuff. It's, people get at each other's throats when they no longer trust the system.
Well, or they quit voting. They just say, my vote doesn't matter. I've heard that so many times, and that's why I've actually pointed to your work and the work of others that say, no, by all means, we must not back up. We must not give up. We must demand that our state leaders follow through. I mean, I think we've talked about it before. I was involved in a Senate race back in '96 in which there was voter fraud in my home state of Louisiana, and we weren't able to adjudicate it to change the outcome. But what we did do is we went back in the legislature the following 2 years. We did voter ID, photo ID for voters. We eliminated the commissioner of elections because the office was corrupt. And so we cleaned up our elections. And we've not had any significant voter fraud or irregularities in 25 years.
Right. And Louisiana now has a great Secretary of State who makes sure it stays that way. And look, that's a great example. Shining light on an issue helps you improve the system. And that's what they're doing in Arizona. That's not what they're going to do in Pennsylvania. That's not what they're going to do in other places in the country, because the leadership isn't there, because they're part of the problem. Nobody in Philadelphia, and certainly not Governor Tom Wolf in Pennsylvania, is going to lead the way to uncovering the problems in Pennsylvania. They're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution.
Well, one of the other reasons they may not want to shine a light on the problem is because it took Louisiana from being a deep blue state to a red state, because when elections are fair and free, people vote, and they vote for policies that reflect their values. And that's what's happened in Louisiana, where we went from one statewide Republican to now only one statewide Democrat, and the legislature controlled both chambers by Republicans, which was not the case when I was elected 25 years ago. So this is absolutely critical. And J. Christian Adams, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having me.